Have you ever heard stories about people facing divine punishment because of their disrespect toward God? These stories carry strong lessons and serve as reminders of what can happen when someone shows irreverence to the divine. Recently, something happened on the streets of America that left people speechless. It was a moment that turned disbelief into belief in the most unexpected way. The story revolves around a young girl who is filled with anger and defiance toward anything related to faith. One day, while walking down the street, she came across a statue that represented God. Instead of ignoring it or simply walking past, she did something shocking. In an open display of disrespect, she spit on the statue and even struck it with her hand. It was a bold and deliberate act meant to show her rejection of the divine and her disbelief in anything sacred. But life has a way of teaching lessons, often when we least expect it. Not long after this act of defiance, the girl started noticing strange things happening in her home. These weren't ordinary occurrences. Her disrespectful actions, which she once laughed about, now seemed like a serious mistake. It wasn't just about her disbelief anymore. It was about how her actions had crossed a line she didn't even realize existed. This change in her didn't happen instantly. It took time for her to process what had happened and what it all meant. But the events she experienced at home were so powerful and so undeniable that they forced her to look at life differently. The girl who once mocked the idea of God now found herself reflecting deeply, questioning everything she once thought was true. To ensure that as many people as possible see this video, kindly take a moment to share this video and subscribe to this channel. May this message touch your heart and help to bring you close to the conversation of souls and the conversion of sinners. If you believe so, please type Amen. One day, a young girl who didn't believe in God and didn't respect anything religious was walking down the street. She was the kind of person who dismissed the idea of faith, seeing it as nothing more than superstition. To her, religion wasn't real, and she often made fun of people who believed in it. That day, as she walked, she came across a statue that symbolized God. It was tall and majestic, something that many in her community admired and respected. But to her, it was just a piece of stone, lifeless and meaningless. Instead of just ignoring the statue and moving on, she decided to do something shocking. With a boldness that surprised even her, she spat on the statue. Then, as if that wasn't enough, she raised her hand and struck it. It was an act full of anger and defiance, a way to show the world that she didn't believe in God or anything divine. People nearby saw what she did, and their faces were filled with shock and disbelief. They couldn't understand how someone could be so disrespectful. But the girl didn't care. She stood there, proud of what she'd done, believing she was making a statement against what she thought was outdated and foolish. However, life has a way of teaching lessons, and hers came sooner than she expected. Later that day, she went home like nothing had happened. At first, everything seemed normal. She went about her evening, not giving the statue or her actions another thought. But as the night went on, a strange feeling crept over her. The air in her house felt heavy, and there was an eerie stillness that made her uneasy. She tried to shake it off, telling herself it was just her imagination. Then, without warning, a fire broke out. It started suddenly, with no clear reason, and it spread quickly. The flames roared through the house, destroying everything in their path. The heat was unbearable, and the thick smoke made it hard to breathe. In a panic, the girl ran for her life, barely making it out of the house before it was completely engulfed in flames. Standing outside, she watched in horror as her home burned to the ground. But as terrifying as the fire was, what she saw in the flames was even worse. Among the raging fire, a shape began to appear. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, but the image became clearer and clearer. It was a figure, a powerful, divine figure that seemed to emerge from the fire itself. It looked like God, and it was staring directly at her. Its gaze was piercing, filled with judgment and authority. She froze in place, unable to look away. At that moment, everything she had done earlier that day came rushing back to her. She thought about the statue, about her disrespectful actions, and she realized this wasn't just a fire. This was a message, a response to her defiance. After the fire, things only got worse for the girl. She started to feel sick, but no one could figure out what was wrong with her. It began as a slight discomfort but quickly turned into something much more serious. She became weak, unable to leave her bed. Doctor after doctor tried to help, but no one could explain her illness. As the days went by, her condition only worsened, and fear began to take hold of her. Lying in bed, with nothing to do but think, her mind kept going back to the statue and the fire. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was connected. Was this some kind of punishment? Was it a sign? The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that her actions had triggered these events. The girl who had once mocked the idea of God now found herself terrified of what she couldn't understand. In her desperation, she did something she hadn't done in years. She prayed. At first, her prayers were hesitant and awkward. She wasn't even sure if she was doing it right. But as her situation grew more dire, her prayers became more heartfelt. She began to ask for forgiveness, to plead for healing, and to promise that she would change if given another chance. She also reached out to people who were strong in their faith, asking for guidance and trying to understand the deeper meaning of what was happening to her. Slowly, something inside her began to shift. The anger and disbelief that had once filled her heart started to fade. She began to feel a sense of humility she had never experienced before. What had once seemed silly and meaningless now felt deeply important. Her suffering, though painful, became a kind of wake-up call, a way for her to see the world differently. As the days passed, her prayers grew stronger, and her faith began to take root. She promised herself that if she recovered, she would dedicate her life to living with respect and gratitude for the divine. And eventually, her health did begin to improve. It wasn't an instant recovery, but little by little, she regained her strength. When she was well enough, she started attending church. She wanted to learn more about the faith she had once rejected so harshly. She read religious texts, listened to sermons, and spent time in quiet prayer. Her life became centered around understanding and honoring the power she had once mocked. But she didn't keep her story to herself. She felt a responsibility to share what had happened to her so that others could learn from her experience. She told people about the statue, the fire, and the figure she had seen in the flames. She talked about her illness and how it had forced her to confront her beliefs. Most importantly, she shared how faith had transformed her, turning her from a skeptic into a believer. Her story became a powerful reminder of the consequences of disrespecting the divine, but also of the incredible power of redemption. The girl who had once stood so proudly in her disbelief was now a symbol of humility and faith. She lived the rest of her life with gratitude, knowing how close she had come to losing everything and how blessed she was to have been given a second chance. Thank you for watching till the end of our video. Our brothers and sisters, without fear and with more faith than in the past, let us continue in faith. Stay blessed and continue to pray for God to show all of us His graces and blessings. God bless us and protect us. Amen.